So, good morning, everyone. My name's Julia Felton, and today we are just going to be talking about one of the topics that I think is so relevant. It's coming up a lot with my clients, so this is why I wanted to talk about it today. We've entitled it Reward the Try: How Elite Teams Build Psychological Safety and Turn Experiments into Wins. And as I said, the reason I wanted to address this topic today is because this is something I'm seeing coming up a lot with clients that I'm talking to at the moment. Because I think most teams out there right now, we don't have a performance problem. We actually have a psychological safety debt. And what do I mean by that? I mean that somewhere along the way, our team members have realized that if they try and do something new in our business and it doesn't work out, they'll get in trouble, they'll pay for it, maybe their job will be in jeopardy. And we'll know we're living in times of austerity right now. People clearly don't want to put their job at any type of threat. And unless we have psychological safety, people don't talk up and give us ideas. So what we're seeing is teams stop taking the initiative because they're waiting for this certainty out there. They're actually keeping their best thinking to themselves. And as a result, momentum in organizations is beginning to bleed out. So what I'd say is if your team members aren't speaking out and they're not telling you about what's going on in the organization, they're not proffering their ideas on how to make the business better and do things differently, then you're already losing momentum and speed in the business. So in this 20-minute teach, I'm going to show you exactly the reward the try cadence that we use in our business to improve trust and take fear away, to create small experiments and turn them into momentum, and to make it the normal to share our sometimes half-baked ideas without getting burned. And when we're able to do that and we're able to try new things, we get more learning cycles in the business, faster decisions, and therefore more visible wins on the board. So I'd just like you to think about this question and think where your number is right now. How confident are your team members that they can take risks and experiment without the fear of repercussions? So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is that they're paralyzed by fear, they're not going to make any decisions at all, and 10 is that they're freely experimenting. So just think about that and just jot it down on a piece of paper. Because I think this gives us a lot of insight into what's actually going on in your team right now. Because if somebody's at a 10 and you're thinking like that's going to mean you've got a culture where people learn fast, nobody gets shamed. But if your number's more down in the red zone and you're like at 1 or 2 and people are paralyzed by fear, this is where you're not going to get much innovation or creativity coming out of your team. So the number that you've put down is really going to predict the decision-making velocity within your business, the level of innovation, and also the level of retention of your team members. Because in my experience, team members actually want to contribute. They want to make a difference. So we need to create that environment where they can. Where does this sit? Some of you will be familiar with my Unbridled Teamship roadmap, and this is the format and model that I use when I work with organizations to help them create high-performing teams. You can see at the center there, we've got a lasting leadership impact, because actually I think that's what most leaders want to achieve. They want to create some legacy by creating a high-performing team that gets things done. So Reward the Try is one of the accelerators of the healthy curiosity pillar, which is all about moving from compliance into candor. Because execution doesn't collapse when teams don't care. It collapses when people don't feel safe. They say things like, I don't know, and they don't want to admit mistakes in case something becomes expensive. So the team starts to look really careful. And it's not because they're lazy, it's because our culture is training our team members to do what's safe. So that's what we're going to do. And today we're going to unpack a little bit about what psychological safety really is and what it isn't. And I'm going to share with you what I call the try loop, which is a way that you can run small experiments that start creating momentum. So let's kick off. So let's think about the way teams operate. I think in the old way, we tend to reward certainty, we praise the win, we tolerate perfection, we punish failure, even subtly, and review becomes a blame hunt. And so what does that create? That creates risk avoidance, politics, silence, a dependency on the leader, and a team that waits to be told what's safe. And when trying becomes dangerous, people stop moving. But as I said, not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is protecting them. When we think about the neurology of this, as human beings, we are wired to want to keep ourselves safe. So if we are in an environment that every time we do something, we get reprimanded for it, then we're never going to try and do everything. So the new way that I would really love you to think about how your teams operate is we want to reward the intelligent risks that our team members take. We want to celebrate learning signals that people have experimented and they've learned from that and they've moved on. We want to make also trying visible, so make these attempts visible. And we also want to tighten the standards through clarity, not fear. So our team members know that they can try things out, and we've got really clear guardrails on what they can and can't do. And then they're going to feel that safety net that they can experiment. So just like to share this with you. And this is a really great philosophy for us to think about within our businesses and our culture. The more we try new things within business, the more experiments we get to run, right? So when we try something new, I want you to think about this now as an experiment. The more experiments you take, the more validated learning that we get. And the more validated learning that we have, the faster the decisions and the cheaper the wins. Because the more that we can learn from what's going on, we are able to then increase trust within the organization and velocity returns, and we're able to get more and more momentum. This is the paradox here, that the more and more we experiment, providing we learn from that experimentation, the more we can move forward in the business and we can accelerate business growth. So the key thing underpinning all of this is something that we call psychological safety. It's spoken a lot about in all the literature that's out there. And the kind of founder of this, for want of a better word, is Amy Edmondson. And she defines psychological safety as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking, meaning that people won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So it's really important to realize that when we're creating a psychological safe environment, it's not about being nice. It's about creating a space where people can say, I think we're missing something. I think we've made a mistake. I don't understand. I disagree. Or maybe even here's a wild idea to think about things in a different way. And we want people to be able to say these things without fear of humiliation, blame, or social exile. And I think it's important to address what psychological safety isn't. It's not about lowering standards. It's not about avoiding harsh feedback. It's not always about getting endless consensus on what we need to do. And it's definitely not about letting people off the hook with a kind of anything goes mentality. It's actually the opposite. When done well, psychological safety creates high standards and also a low level of fear. And when this happens, this is when teams learn and perform fast and effectively and consistently. So Amy Edmondson is very clear that psychological safety is a learning and performance concept. It's not a kind of cozy culture concept. So With that in mind, I just want to share with you some research from Google. And this is Google's Project Aristotle. And it was some research they did on team effectiveness. And what it highlighted there at the bottom in the green bar was that psychological safety is the most important team dynamic. Because people will take interpersonal risks, speak up, and learn faster when it's present. So this is really important given the environment that we live in today. We're not going to get the agility and adaptability that we need in our organizations to navigate change and uncertainty without psychological safety. And what the research also showed was when we've got this level of psychological safety, then we get dependability within our team members. And then everyone has clear goals and they understand their roles. And then team members can start aligning themselves with work that feels meaningful to them, where they're making a contribution, and then they can see how their work makes an impact. And when people find that their work makes an impact, they're much more highly engaged and motivated. So psychological safety is really underpinning everything in the workplace today, because our team members want to feel that degree of safety and belonging and knowing that they're part of an organization that cares for them and that they can voice their concerns as and when they see things. And from a leader's perspective, it enables us to have this level of innovation and adaptability and flexibility that we need to navigate the change that's going on. So how do we create psychological safety in the workplace? I'd like to suggest there's 4 ways. The first is we want to frame the work as learning, not flawless execution. When we're working with our team, we want them to know it's okay to make mistakes. And I know that might sound a bit strange when I say that, but let's face it, the only way that people learn a bit is by making mistakes. So as a leader, we need to set things up so that our team members get the opportunity to make that mistake. So I want you to think about this as work as an experiment, as I said earlier on. Think about it like we're running a small test. We're here to learn quickly and not look perfect. And we will reward early truth over late polish. So we want to create practical ways to create the safety that tells our people that they can try new things out. And I think we all have to agree right now that we are living in a time when none of us have experienced living through this before. There's some crazy stuff going on in the Middle East right now as we're recording this, as we're putting this out. AI is changing our work landscape on a daily, hourly basis, right? So none of us have been there before. None of us know what is going to work. None of us have a degree of certainty because what actually worked last week might not work this week. So this is why we've got to adopt this mindset that this is all about running experiments. Second thing I want to think about as we create psychological safety is we want to model fallibility. Gosh, I can't even say the word without dumping your anxiety on the team. So being fallible, being vulnerable, this is the fastest trust accelerator that there is out there. And this is things like leaders really admitting, I might be missing something. What do you see? Here's my current thinking, but I'm open to challenge. I've got that wrong. Thanks for catching me. Because this is about leaders being human. And the team stops wasting time on self-protection when they know that the leader feels comfortable being vulnerable and admitting that they don't know everything. And let's face it, in this world that we live in today, no leader can know everything. The leader hasn't been there before. They haven't tried it before. So the leader is learning at the same speed that our team is learning. The next thing we want to do to create psychological safety is replace who messed up with what did we learn? People will only take risks when they know that they are not going to be penalized for it. So we need to ensure that we don't use any blame language when we're reviewing what happened. We're only using learning language. And what we want to do is learn from it and learn from it collectively, and then make some clear decisions about what changes next. Because actually, the biggest problem is trying an experiment and not learning from it. Because if nothing changes after the learning and people stop speaking up, then we're not rewarding people for trying something new. And this is really important. We need to reward people for trying something new. And therefore, the fourth way that we create psychological safety is responding well when somebody takes the risk. And this is the moment of make or break out there right now. Because when somebody says something that's pretty hard, the first response needs to be from you as a leader, thanks for raising that. Say more. What are you seeing that we're not seeing? Even if you disagree with what they're saying, we need to make sure that person feels heard and that we're taking on board what they say. Because actually, our immediate response trains people in how they want to show up and whether they're prepared to share anything with us. So, if you want ownership, you've got to make it safe to be seen to be trying. And a lot of leaders I've been working with recently have been saying to me, one of the biggest challenges that they're having right now is team members taking ownership. People won't take ownership and accountability if they don't feel that it's safe to do. We often hear about people, right? They're dodging the bullet, right? People say that I wasn't responsible for that. I wasn't accountable for that. That's not my thing. So this is people dodging the bullet. What we need in order to get high performance is people to take accountability for their areas. And they're only going to take that if they feel supported and they're working in an environment of high psychological safety. So I want to share with you now what I call the try loop. So the first part of this loop is test. So when we're doing these experiments, we don't want to start with a big experiment. We want to try something with something that is small and learn from it. So you might want to consider, what's the smallest version of this thing that we can do that we can test for 7 days? And what guardrails can we put in place to keep it safe in terms of time and budget and customer impact and reputation risk? And also, what would success look like? And what would count as useful learning? And the thing is, it's really important that we can decide what these guardrails are, because if we can't name the guardrails, the team will either freeze and not do the work, or they will panic and not be sure what to do. So we've got to give them effectively a sandbox, a sandpit in which to try the experiment. Also important to think about doing something that's small and safe, right? What I've seen happen in some businesses is when a leader isn't sure what to do, they can give a piece of work to a team member and ask them to go off and do it without setting these guardrails in place. And if we're not careful, in the worst situation, that can take a business down. So just think about somebody like Nick Leeson, where he actually took down the whole of Barings Bank, I believe it was. Yeah. So that here's a team member. He was given a role to do with no guidelines, no guardrails in terms of how to keep it safe and budgets and everything else. Total abdication from senior leadership about what he was doing. And of course, he started embezzling from the company and ended up taking the whole company down. So we've always got to make sure that what we want to test is small enough that, knowing that there's a high probability it might go wrong, it's not going to fundamentally damage the business in the longer term. Second part of the try loop is reward. So when we're reviewing what goes on, we want to use 3 questions. What did we expect? What happened? And what did we learn that could change our next move? So no judgment, who did this, who did that. Because if we start trying to shame people, that's when trying stops in the business. So a great example of reward is one that I read about something that happened within Virgin Airlines. And this is a situation where some of you will be familiar. If you fly in Virgin upper class, you get a free taxi to the airport. And it was reported that what happened was gentlemen showed up at JFK and their taxi had failed to pick them up to bring them to the airport. So the gentleman had to pay for his own taxi. So when he went to check in for the flight, he was a little bit upset about that, as you might imagine. And the check-in clerk, realizing this gentleman's level of dissatisfaction, went and immediately paid back the taxi fare to the customer in the moment. They didn't have any receipts. They just went and did what seemed the right thing to do. So then they submitted some expenses to their boss to claim back the money that they paid to this customer. And their boss wouldn't pay them the money back because they didn't have any receipts. So the story goes that Richard Branson eventually heard about this and he was furious because he said this is exactly the type of action we want our frontline staff to take. We want them to solve problems in the moment on the front line. And once he intervened, that team member was obviously remunerated for that money. They were rewarded for the action they took, and actually their line manager was reprimanded for trying to shut down that person who was trying to make something better for a client. So that's a classic example of an experiment that we wanted to encourage with a team member doing. And then the why is yes and. So how do we apply the learning? Really important that once we'd figured out, after we've done the test, we've rewarded the test, we've figured out what's going on, then we need to apply it. So we need to decide if we can scale it, how do we need to tweak it, how do we need to stop it? How are we capturing the learning from what went on? Because again, if nothing changes, our people will stop trying. So we need to create this environment of, yes, we found this out and this is what we're going to do next. And this is how we're going to do it differently next time. So I want to introduce you to something called the decision line here. 5 levels of decision. At the lowest level, these are the people closest to work. And they are the people that are best empowered to make fast decisions. But they can only do that if they've got clear ownership. Then level 2 is about cross-team decision-making, coordination, dependencies, and handovers. Level 3 is about the leadership team, so trade-off, prioritization, and resourcing. Level 4 is when we get to founder and executive bottlenecks, everything stopping on their desk. And level 5 is the meeting machine, where decisions are discussed and not made. And perhaps many of you might recognize that we often in business are stuck at levels 4 and 5, where we've got our team members continually escalating things up to avoid being wrong, this fear of recrimination. But actually what we want to do is like that, a check-in clerk at Virgin, we want them to be empowered so people on the front line make the decisions and they know that they're not going to be punished. So if you are finding that your decision making is getting pushed up the ladder like this, the first thing I'd say to you is don't blame your team. The question to really ask yourself is, what is the fear that is making the decisions get pushed upwards in the organization? So what can we do to shorten this decision line? First of all, we need to decide who decides. So the decision rights, who decides? Because if everyone owns it, nobody owns it. So we need to get some clarity, first of all, about who's got the first decision rights. Then we need to have some clarity about who the decision rules belong to. What boundaries keep it safe? What are the budget limits, the time, the customer impact, the legal, the compliance, the risk level, the time frame? Because actually, these guardrails create freedom. When people know, if that Virgin clerk, for example, knew that she was able to refund taxi receipts up to, say, $1,000 or something, she would have felt even more empowered and confident to do that. This person was very brave. They took it upon themselves to do. And the third thing is decision review. So how are we going to learn fast? So what did we expect? What happened? What changes next? Because as I said, if nothing changes after a review, trying dies. So those are the ways that we shorten the decision cycle within business. Couple of things. Some of the objections to creating psychological safety in the workplace that I'm coming across right now are lower standards, where reward the try isn't the gold star for effort. It's a precise acknowledgement of high quality behavior. So what can we use? What are some of the language you can use? You might be things like you moved first and you did it responsibly. That's leadership. You surfaced the risk early. That protected the team. You asked for feedback before it got expensive. That shows strong judgment. You stopped the trial when the data said stop. That's maturity. You owned what didn't work without excuses. I trust you more, not less. So it's really important that we think about our language that we're using with people to encourage them. Some of the other objections is that people say to me, people will game it. They'll pretend something, they'll try and experiment with something. Trust me, in all my times in corporate, I had a lot of times when I was working in a data analytics business where my clients kept saying to me, everyone else is going to game the data in this. They're not going to give me the right data. Trust me, over time, it's really difficult to keep gaming something and get it right and go with trends. I've seen that, I've experienced it. I don't think it's that easy to do. You could potentially find it happen once or twice where somebody pretends they've done an experiment and they haven't. But generally, in my experience, I don't find that happening. So as we bring this to a close, I just want to give you my 7-day try ritual for meetings. So in each meeting, I'd love you to think about asking your team, what's one try they made this week? What they learned from it was, and what their next try will be the following week. So this gives our team members permission to try things new, to realize that we are actively supporting them, experimenting and doing something new. Okay. And finally, I just want to say to you this. It's not what you don't say that counts, it's how you show up. So this is really important. Some of you might know that body language is one of kind of my specialities. And there's a lot of leaders that can maybe say the right thing. I say, oh, yes, that was a good idea. But their whole body language is screaming. That's not what I think. So just be really careful when we're having conversations with team members about rewarding the try, that you don't unwittingly punish it by things like a raised eyebrow, a sarcastic joke, something like, why would you do something like that? Because again, all of that shuts down people wanting to experiment. If your team is waiting for clarity to do things and to experiment, they probably are waiting for you to give them some permission to be imperfect. So I'd really encourage you to think about one thing that your team is scared to try out. Shrink it down to something small that you can do within 7 days, guardrail it and review it without blame, and then actually change something afterwards. Because as Richard Branson says, we experiment endlessly with new products, new methods, new companies, new marketing, a successful business. The emphasis is on experiment and development. Ideas are the lifeblood of business. And if we don't create this environment of experimentation, then nothing happens. So if you'd like to find more about this, I'd encourage you to obviously go to our website, businesshorsepower.com. You can take a Turbocharge Your Team quiz there at businesshorsepower/.quiz. And then you can book a complimentary Turbocharge Your Team audit. And you can also stay connected by listening to the Impactful Team Work podcast at businesshorsepower.com/podcast or follow me on LinkedIn. So hope you found that useful. If you've got any comments, please do stop and ask them now.